Yes, let us look at now the discontinuity of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Discontinuity. What is in the Old that is not allowed in the New? So, although in the Old Testament people were expected to, although in the Old Testament people were expecting the coming of the Messiah, so they thought that the Messiah would be a politician. They thought that the Messiah who is going to come is going to be a politician, a powerful man like David, who would come to fight and defeat the enemies of the Jews. They thought that the Messiah that is going to come is going to be a politician, is going to be a leader, is going to be a king just like King David. But surprisingly, when he came, he was not. So even the Jews in the New Testament had a similar thinking. However, the Messiah in the New Testament is a religious one. So in the beginning, in the Old, they thought the person is going to come is going to be a politician. They thought he's going to be a powerful man like David. Remember, Jesus came from the line of David. So they thought that he's going to be like a king, he's going to be a politician. But when he came in the New Testament, he was not even a politician, but he was just a religious one. So that is the difference, the discontinuity, that in the beginning, in the Old Testament, they thought the Messiah was to come as a politician or as a strong leader. But in the New Testament, he came as a religious leader, not a politician and not a strong king like David. 2, in the Old Testament, there was emphasis on what they call the observation of the law. The law was emphasized. But in the New Testament, Jesus himself was the law. He told them, I am the law. I remember a scenario when he went and he healed a man, the pool on the Sabbath day. He made a miracle on the Sabbath day. Yet to the society, they were not allowed even to do anything on the Sabbath. The people had not to do anything, break the law. But Jesus told them that I am the law. So, for example, failure to wash the hands in the manner required by the traditions of the elders, or failure to keep the Sabbath as it was interpreted by the Jews and the Pharisees, was understood to be a sin by the Jewish community. So the New Testament, in brackets, Jesus' teaching, disagrees with this. Jesus emphasized the 10 commandments, especially the commandment of love. So to Jesus, love was more emphasized, but in the Old Testament, it was the law emphasized. That is the difference. That is the discontinuity. That in the Old, it was more emphasized for the people to follow the law, but in the New, love was emphasized by Jesus because he told them, I am the law. So no need of following the law. Better be having what they call love, one of the greatest commandments. So in the Old Testament, women could not enter the parts of the temple where the men offered the sacrifice. So women were left behind in the Old Testament. They were discriminated by the men in the Old Testament. But in the Jewish community, in the New Testament, Jesus tried to bring this gender closer. For instance, when the Pharisees caught a woman who had committed adultery and they tied her on the rock, trying to stone her to death, and Jesus stopped them, telling them, if any of you has never done this, let that person be the first person to throw a stone at her. And all these men threw the stones down, and actually they left. So this was a clear evidence that these people had sinned even more than this lady. That is also one of the discontinuity of the New and Old Testament. So the discontinuity is like the conflicting part between the two. What is this one saying? What this one say? Is the same thing which New Testament did? No. The New Testament is emphasizing eating food. This one is emphasizing taking water. So the difference is what we call discontinuity. But continuity is the similarity. What do they agree? What do they believe in that is the same? But discontinuity is the differences in what they preach and what they teach and what they emphasize. Another one. In the Old Testament, revenge was allowed by the law. Thus, an eye to an eye, tooth for tooth. This is rejected by Jesus, who emphasized forgiveness. Love your enemies. Give food to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. You can read it from the book of Luke, chapter 20, chapter 20, chapter 6, verse 27 to 28. You can find there. For him, Jesus emphasized love. Revenge is prohibited in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, it was emphasized. It was okay for you to revenge. Revenge was allowed. If someone beats you, you were allowed to beat that person. You put this cheek. So Jesus, for him, he said, no, vengeance is bad. Love your enemy, give them food, give them water, give them shelter, love them, bring them closer to you. So another one, some laws like those of the book of Leviticus, the foods to be eaten, that is the food prohibitions. In Leviticus 11, verse 1 to 47, they were looking at the unclean animal. Look at cleansing of lepers in the book of Leviticus, chapter 14, verse 1 to 7 to 57. Look at the sacredness of the blood, purification of women after menstruation and childbirth, among others. These are named in the New Testament by Jesus Christ. For example, Jesus Christ decided that all foods are fit to be eaten. For him, he said that what goes inside does not make man unclean, but what comes outside is what makes someone unclean. So to Jesus, it was like what you eat doesn't make you unclean, but what comes out of you, it is that thing that makes you unclean. So to Jesus, foods were all supposed to be eaten. If you look at the book of Leviticus, many of the animals were prohibited. The so-called pigs, the so rabbits, the camels were prohibited. That in that book, they are even taken to be unclean. Animals without separated hooves, the types of fish that do not have scales and etc., they are not allowed to be eaten. But when Jesus came as the new covenant, he said all animals, all foods must be free to be eaten. That's why some people eat things like snakes, because they told them to be eaten, but that in the Old Testament, they were prohibited from eating such animals because they took them to be unclean.